Hi, this is sort of an impromptu, in the middle of a repair kind of video. Actually, it's kind of at the end of the repair because this set's almost done. This is a customer's NuTone N2561, 2562. This particular one is from 1969 and it is an E-chassis model, and you can tell it's an E-chassis model because it's got the big blue primary filter capacitor down here. I did a video about this type of chassis, and I will put one of those pop-ups that you can go to that and see more details about all of that. That's not what this is about. This is about how these sets seem to be becoming more and more difficult to actually repair. And the parts of them that are actually more and more difficult to repair have to do entirely, I think, with the age of the units. So this is 1969. It's not quite in the middle, but close to the middle of production for this model. This was available from 1962 through the end of 1974. It's a relatively straightforward model. There are many different chassis versions because it was updated continuously over time. Some of it remains the same almost identically throughout the entire production life of it. And the way you look at a set like this is it's really more radio than it is intercom. The intercom portion of it is relatively simple to repair. Most of them have entirely what I call age-related problems. They become old and tired, and there's all kinds of components and rebuilding that needs to be done to restore them back to what they were new. Like this one in particular, and other ones I've done lately over the last year or so, have some more interesting, what I call, again, age-related problems. This particular set had two very annoying problems. It has to do with this. This is the control here. This is the on-off system volume and tone control. And this is the variable capacitor or air capacitor for the AM tuner behind the dial here. So let's look at these one at a time. Tell you what, let's get these wires out of the way and take a look at these. Let's do this one first, since this is the one that I did the replacement of first. So this is the system volume and tone control. It's also the on-off switch. So it's a 4-gang assembly. There are 3 individual potentiometers or pots, and then on the back end here is the actual mechanical on-off switch. So when you turn the knob, let's take the knob off here because it's easier this way. If you turn the knob, you can hear it go click. Sometimes the on-off switches fail, and that's just a mechanical thing. It's from use, but they are fairly well made. One of the things to understand about the 2561 62s is these were made out of very high quality parts to start with. So they are very long lasting. But in this particular unit, the one that belongs to this customer, the volume control assembly had a giant dead spot in it. It was about 1/3 of the rotation of the knob. The knob turns about, if we go from there to there, it's about 3/4 of a turn all the way around from one end to the other. And right in the middle of it, the range that you would use the most, surprisingly enough, there was a big dead spot in it. And no matter what you do, cleaned, and couldn't bring it back, wouldn't work. And of course, that doesn't work well for the customer because that's kind of where you need to have it set. This is an interesting control because there are 3 pots. You would think that in a monaural design like this, you would have 2 pots, one for the volume, one for the tone, because outer shaft here, and we can put this on it, this is the little tone control knob, and this rotates separately from the volume knob, which sits in front of it like that. So this little tab sticks out and you can adjust the tone. One of the pots is for the tone control, and then the other pots are for volume. And the reason there are 2 pots is because they have different inputs from different sections of the unit. So essentially, one pot is for the radio volume and the other pot is for the auxiliary or phono input. It's kind of a weird design, but that's the way they decided to do it for some reason. Of course, parts like this, they don't exist anymore. There isn't any place you can go and buy one of these brand new. It just isn't going to happen. It's a very unique kind of part in today's world. There are dual volume controls, but you get into all kinds of problems with finding the right form factor because the pots have to be the right values. They have to have the right taper to them. Volume control pots can have a linear taper, or they can have what's called an audio taper, which these are audio taper. They have to be the right size. They have to be the right resistance in the pot. They have to have the correct shaft length and be able to accept the knobs and so forth. And it's a lot to ask. because these are parts that were common in probably the late 50s and early 60s, and I'm sure NuTone had a deal with the manufacturer that made these. I don't know who it is because it doesn't really say. There are part numbers on it, but that doesn't really help you. Trying to find genuine original replacement parts. NuTone has no parts for intercoms at all anymore, and these haven't been available from any source as like new old stock parts or leftover parts when they came out of NuTone's inventory. It's probably been more than 10 or 15 years. So the only source for replacements are from donor units. Donor units are a polite way of saying used. So we have used chassis that are essentially parts units, and you rob one out of it, and there's a little bit of cross your fingers and hope that the one you're taking out is in better shape than the one you're replacing. Fortunately, this one is. The thing about this is also, this is entirely a pain in the neck to do. It took me, and I'll sort of flip it around, you can't really see necessarily very well, but it's buried down in here, inside all of this. And there are no fewer than, let's see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There are 12 individual wires that connect this up to the rest of the set. Now, when this set was made, the way it would have been assembled is this volume control pot would have had all of the proper colored wires already soldered onto it. It would have been made up as an assembly, and all the wires would be the correct length and everything because you don't want to waste wire. And then it would be put into the chassis and then routed through the chassis, and the other ends of the wires would be connected up to wherever it is they go. That's not the best approach when you replace one of these because you're doubling the amount of work that you have to actually do, and you're disturbing more and more of the set as you do it. And I'm not a big fan of doing that. So what you have to do is you have to very carefully detach all of the wires off the original control down inside here. I always make drawings as to where they all go because there's a lot of wires, and you have to get them all back in the right spots. You can't mix them up because then it doesn't work right. And then you have to extract the original one. Then you have to take this one, which you took out of another chassis, and took all the wires off of it. You don't have to be as careful with removing the wires when you take this one out of a chassis because you're putting it in this one, so you know. And then put it in here and very carefully one by one hook up all the wires and then remount it all. The other thing that you really have to do on this is there's a tuning coil for the radio down in here that sits right alongside of it. It's much easier to remove that from the set completely to give yourself and your big fingers more room to reach in there and do things, and that way you don't accidentally damage the coil either. This took me to swap this out. This is the original, this is the replacement. This took me what I called one concentrated hour of effort to do, which is a long time. That means start to finish, sit at the bench, do it step by step, and it takes me an hour to change out one switch because there's a lot to do. Well, it's also part of that hour is taking the old one out of the other chassis. That solved that problem. This is very, very, very good, where this is very, very, very bad. The other problem with this was, flip this back over, these models tend to have some radio problems sometimes, and they're age-related problems, and it's mostly on the FM. And the reason that they have FM problems is because the front end of the FM tuner, and the front end is this part in this box right here. Components in there age out sometimes. One of the reasons why there are so many different chassis versions on 256162s is because the front end tuner assembly, they were updated and changed out many, many, many times over its production life because the design of FM tuners and so forth were still developing, because you do have to think about the fact that there was a time that there was only AM radio. FM didn't come along till later, and so designing FM tuners was still a relatively newish idea in 1962, and by the time you get to 1969, this was a more standardized FM tuner that NuTone used in a lot of different intercoms, and it's a much better design. But there are components in this that age out, and those components are sometimes difficult to replace because they're not really made much anymore, because people don't design tuners like this anymore. Tuners nowadays, you can have one integrated circuit that's almost an entire FM tuner on its own. You got a few other little parts to support it, but nothing major. So designs have changed a lot because technology has changed a lot. In this particular set, the FM's great. It's really, really strong, and it sounds really, really, really good, and I didn't really have to do very much with it at all. Just cleaned it up a little bit, tweaked it, the adjustments, the alignment just a little bit to bring it back to where I really wanted it to be, and it's very, very strong. The AM was a whole nother story. Now, AM tuners are very simple by comparison to FM tuners. The way you look at a set like this is most of this board up here, which is all of this in here, is all AM FM tuner stuff. Yeah, you got the FM here, you got the AM variable condenser or capacitor here, but all of this is the rest of the tuner. Very little ever goes wrong with this up here. In fact, very little ever goes wrong with the AM. But every now and then you get one that has a big problem. And the big problem with this one was, and we'll put the knob back on like that. First, it had almost no AM reception at all. Then, when you would turn the knob looking for your station, you would get to about here. It would be like 980 or so. And between 980 and maybe like 1220-ish on the dial, it would go as you turn the knob back and forth. It makes this staticky scratching sound. Now the knob is connected to this. This is the original one that used to be in this set. This is a AM. It's a variable capacitor. Some people call it an air capacitor. Some people call them variable condensers. It kind of depends on what era you're from. All of those terms are valid for what it does. And it's actually a fairly intricate but simple device. There are essentially two parts to it. When you turn the knob, you can see the fins rotate. The rotating part, these are called the rotor. And down in here are the fixed fins, and those are the stator. This is a capacitor. So it's called an air capacitor sometimes because the fins on the stator don't touch the fins on the rotor. When you close it or open it, there's a tiny, tiny air gap in between the sides of each fin, whether it's on the stator or on the rotor, on the movable part or the fixed part. There's an air gap in between them, and that's what creates the capacitance. And as the fins mesh closed or open back up, that's what changes the capacitance, and that's part of how you tune the radio. That's for AM. It's used on FM too, but FM designs are somewhat different. The problem with this one, and it's not uncommon on this particular model, that sometimes they become somewhat noisy because you have this brass sort of tuning shaft here, and it's supported here on the front with little ball bearings, and on a little dimple here on the back with a clip. And sometimes they get really, really dirty, and as you turn it, because when you turn the knob, you're turning the brass shaft also, because the stator, the movable fins are connected to the shaft, so you're moving it all, and sometimes they get really dirty, and when you turn it, it like doesn't make a good connection all the time, and you get noise out of it. So you clean it a little bit very carefully, and then you lubricate it a little bit very carefully, and that usually will clear it up. Now, I'm going to give you a caution now, so listen very carefully, and I'm going to say it again. Listen very carefully. You never, ever, 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 ever spray anything on the fins. Ever. It's like, oh, I'm going to clean it all. I'm going to get my contact cleaner and spray the heck out of it and wash it all down and all this other kind of stuff. No, 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 no. If you do that, you will get residue on the fins, which you will never get cleaned off all the way. And then it will throw the capacitance rating of this assembly way out of whack. And way out of whack is a technical term, and it will never work properly in your radio again, ever. So never clean it. The only thing you ever do, the only thing I ever do, is you can lightly brush it off with a very, very, very fine, I have a little fine, long bristle paintbrush that gets into the fins and wipes away the dust, and then you can use a little compressed air on it. And that's all you ever do. I have had sets like this come in where people tried to clean the switches and things on the master station, and they get the switch cleaner spray all over this, and then this is ruined. So do not do that. Okay, back to our story. So what's wrong with this one, where the scratchy noise came from, because it was obvious to me that I'm going to have to take it out and probably replace it, is, and I can't really necessarily show you because it's too small, but I will zoom in some because it'll get a better idea. All right, this is as close to zoomed in as I can get. Here's our stator. Got the small section and the small diameter here, the larger section with the large diameter here, and if I turn it, you will see it move. All right, that's closing. Okay, and this is opening. What I found on this was, and I need to get the magnifier so I can see it properly and kind of describe it to you, is when this is about wait for it. Okay, that way. When this is about right there, which is about halfway, which if you look at this, if you were looking at the dial, the AM radio dial, it's about halfway on the dial. When it's in this position right here, the air gap between the small stator fins and the small rotor fins is about the same all the way across. As you turn it more this way, as you close it, the gap decreases, and when you get about right there ish, the fins are actually touching and the air gap is gone, and the fins can't touch each other. That's not allowed, and that's where the scratchy sound comes from. It's the fins actually scraping across each other in sort of a microscopic kind of way. And also that's why there was no reception on the tuner, because this assembly is, the technical term for it is, all jacked up. Now the question is really, why is it like that? And that's a question that I don't really necessarily have a good answer for, because it seems to me that it's almost as if it were made incorrectly or something, because but it's hard to figure out, because all of the fins on both sections are connected to the same shaft. Nothing is loose or wobbly or anything like that. So it's almost as if the fins are bent for some reason, or not even bent so much, maybe warped. But I don't know why, because I don't see any way that would have happened. The only thing I can think of, because you can't see it, but I actually can when I look at it really carefully. If you look at this gap right here, which I think you can see me pointing to, if you look at it, the width of the gap here is probably 50% wider than the width of the gap down here. And the only thing I can think of is, because it wasn't made that way, because if it was made that way and it was horribly wrong, when the tuner in the set was aligned at the factory before it was put, finalized and put in a box to be sold, it would have done the same thing, and it wouldn't have been able to be aligned, and they wouldn't have obviously sent it out with a big problem like that, because it would have just come back. So that's not it. So the only other thing I can think of is somebody's been in the set before. I don't know what or why, because there was no repairs done to the set that I could see, no previous repairs, unless there was something wrong with the tuning in general on the AM, and somebody got in there with a screwdriver. Oh, I know how to fix it. I can cram a screwdriver and we'll bend the little fins and da-da-da. And no, that's all bad. I don't know why, but I do know that it was something that needed to be taken care of. So again, we robbed one out of a donor unit and we put it in here. and hooked it all back up. And to do that, that's not a terribly difficult thing to do. It's a little bit, there's a little bit that you have to do because it's a physical device, and there's only two wires that connect it to the circuit board. So there's only two wires that connect it to the circuit board. The only thing you really have to do is there's this other adjustment coil right here that sits right behind it. To get this out, you have to take the screws out of the front so this comes loose, and you have to slide it straight back. And this is of course in the way, so you have to remove this one from the board to make enough room to slide it to get it out. So other than that, it's not a big deal. Okay, when this set was made, this is 1969. So let's say it was put in 1970. When this was put in, by the time I started working on NuTone stuff, when I very first started, this set would have been about, let's say 1970, this set would have been probably 12 or 13 years old. This would have been sort of a standard service call, go to the lady's house, clean the switches, do a little bit of this and that. And, you know, it was like probably the first service call it would have would be when it was 12 or 15 years old, and you would just do a little general maintenance on it and everything would be great. This kind of stuff never was a problem before, but it does sort of validate one of the rules that I like to follow, one of the things that I've learned and believe in, which is time changes everything. So as the sets continue to get older and older and older, and if you think about it in realistic terms, this set is 54 years old. Gosh, really? Okay, too much time has gone by. So what does time changes everything mean? It means that the problems that you saw on sets like this when they were 15 years old are going to be entirely different than the problems you see on sets like this when they're more than 50 years old. And to counter what some people will be thinking, and some people tell me on the phone when I talk to them about their intercoms, is, yeah, but we never really used it. Sometimes that factors into it, and sometimes it doesn't. You can't really just fall back on, oh, I never really used it. Because even if you use it just a normal amount, it's a normal amount times 54 years. Which is a whole lot. One of the reasons that some things in these sets last so long is this. Listen carefully. That's the sound of a true on-off switch. So these sets, when you click them off, they're off. They're completely and totally and fully turned off. Sets like these tend to spend, in my opinion, I've always told this to people, they spend about half their life turned off because most people do not leave their intercoms turned on 24/7, especially back in the olden days. And the olden days would be like the 60s and 70s. I cannot imagine my grandmother getting ready to go to bed at night, and you lock the doors, you turn off the lights, and you turn the intercom off. She's not going to leave it on all night. She's not going to use it. That's her mindset. I'm going to be asleep. I'm not going to use it. Why should I leave it on? And it isn't like, oh, it's using electricity and it's costing me money kind of things. It's just, you just don't do that. You know, that's the same thing as you don't leave the clothes dryer running when you go out. You always turn it off because you don't want the clothes dryer running when you're not home. Because, I don't know, it could catch on fire and burn your house down or something. Maybe that happened in the old days. I don't know. And then you don't turn it back on again until the next time you're going to use it. And the next time could be the next day, or it could be 3 days, or it could be a week. I don't know. So they spend a lot of their life turned off, and that is one of the reasons why sets that have real on-off switches last so much longer than systems that were made starting in, say, 1984, which are always on to some degree all the time. They rack up a lot more hours in a shorter period of time than sets that you can actually turn off. But this is another, it is a successful repair. It now does play well. I have to clean the knobs and do a few things and put it back on its faceplate and stuff. But these kind of things are becoming more and more of an issue because the sets keep getting older and older. And what that means for me so much is that I have to keep my eye out for more and more sets to buy, used ones, of course, because we got to have parts. Things like these is not an infinite supply. And also, as I told you, this you can't buy anymore. These you can't really buy anymore either. There are companies that make these and people use them for their own designs or whatever it is, but this is a part from days gone by. So to find one, again, that the right rating, okay, that you can do. To find one with the right form factor that fits in the chassis and mounts in the right way and has the shaft for the right kind of knob and the dial and all that sort of stuff, nuh-uh, ain't gonna happen. It's just too difficult. So these become harder and harder to fix as time goes on. Anyway, that's just me sort of walking through the frustration of working on something like this because it seems like it keeps getting harder and harder. Hope you found this interesting, and maybe for someone it will be helpful. If it is, give it a thumbs up on YouTube because that helps us just a little bit. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell, and when you click on the bell, click on it to receive all notifications. And every time we post a new video, you'll get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.